Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. We have some massive breaking news regarding Francis Ngannou. We are getting Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou in a boxing match on October 28th in Saudi Arabia. This is going to be my reaction to the news. This is going to be my early prediction to the news. We're going to talk about the background of the whole UFC Francis Ngannou PFL situation. We're also going to discuss how this means massive UFC news incoming. And I'm also going to discuss how during this whole entire Francis Ngannou saga over the past year or so, I've been incredibly consistent on the issue, covering the facts of the Francis Ngannou situation. Today, my perspective changed just a little bit, and we're also going to discuss that in this video as well. Now, I've done a full in-depth breakdown of the entire Francis Ngannou UFC situation that I will link down below. It's a 30-minute video if you want a more in-depth breakdown of the whole contract situation. But just some quick background. Francis Ngannou wanted to fight out his UFC contract. The UFC did not want Francis Ngannou to fight out his new contract. They wanted him to sign a new one under the terms that the UFC wanted and not terms that Francis Ngannou was happy with. So because of a sunset clause that was issued into the UFC contract years ago when the antitrust lawsuit was originally brought forth to the UFC, Francis Ngannou was able to get out of his contract 5 years from when it was initially signed, which was January of this year. He was finally free from the UFC. He was not cut from the organization. He was not released from the organization, contrary to what Dana White would want you to believe. Now, as soon as he got out of this contract, the UFC had already announced like a week prior, they were doing John Jones versus Cyril Gane for the vacant heavyweight title. And we already knew. I already knew, if you've been watching the sport for the last 10 years, 12 years, you already knew Dana White and the UFC propaganda machine was immediately going to start to discredit Francis Ngannou and attempt to trash Francis Ngannou. And they immediately started doing that. And a lot of the UFC fans and the Zuffa zombies, the WME zombies, and the Dana White sycophants immediately start to eat that up. And even though from the time Francis Ngannou, we realized that he was a free agent, and then we got no news for a month, 2 months. It was kind of really nothing. Francis Ngannou hadn't came out with any news. He was injured. He was recovering from an injury. The Dana White sycophants and the UFC shills continued to say, Francis Ngannou fumbled the bag. He made a massive mistake. He could have got paid higher than Brock Lesnar. What a mistake this was. They didn't even know what was happening. You know, they did not even know what was going to happen because we didn't have any information. I said, oh, let's pump the brakes here. We don't know. We don't have any information yet. We don't know what Francis Ngannou, what kind of deal he's liable to sign. We don't know what he's liable to end up doing. We can't say he made a mistake when we don't have all the information yet. You know, a year down the line, 2 years from down the line, we might be able to know, but right now it's impossible to know. He just got out of his UFC contract. He's recovering from an ACL surgery. It's impossible to know. But sure enough, these Dana White sycophants continue to say, oh, Francis Ngannou, what a mistake he made. He could have made this amount of money and that amount of money. And then you had BKFC come out and say, oh, Francis Ngannou is too expensive. And also, right coincide with that, BKFC was having their biggest event. They were trying to get publicity. They were outright lying. BKFC, they can't afford me, let alone Francis Ngannou. BKFC doesn't really have any money. They're going to go broke. They're most likely going to go out of business in the next couple of years. Then, like a week or two later, you had Chatri, the One Championship CEO, come out and say, oh, Francis Ngannou turned down 20 million, and he wanted all this and wanted all that. Chatri is not a reliable source at all. He is essentially a version of Dana White. You can't take his word for it. And also, him coming out and saying that, I believe he said it on the MMA Hour, you know, he had his biggest event coming up and just coincided with one of his biggest events of the year that he came out and said Francis Ngannou turned down 20 million. So now after both these, you know, presidents of certain combat sports organizations have come out and said, you know, Francis Ngannou is too expensive, everyone really started to go at Francis Ngannou and said, this guy made a mistake. He's going to be broke. He's going to be poor. What a mistake he made. Fumble the bag was mentioned 100 million times. I don't know how many times I heard that when I said, we got to wait and see. We're in a waiting game right now. We don't know what kind of deal he's going to sign. And then he signed a massive deal with PFL where he got paid more than the UFC was willing to pay him, if not the same. He got 50% of the pay-per-view revenue from the sales. And there's a long list of everything Francis Ngannou got. I'll put it up on the screen. I'm not going to go through it. I went through it in the other video. But he got this mega deal. the biggest deal in MMA history for any heavyweight. And he's getting paid more and getting more benefits and all the benefits that he wanted from the UFC that the UFC was unwilling to offer, including the freedom to go box. If he can find a boxing match against an opponent that he wants, he is free to go do that, which is what he wanted in the UFC. And when this deal came out, everyone started moving the goalposts. I said this for a long time. No matter what Francis Ngannou does, they're going to continue to move the goalpost. And when he signed this massive deal, they started saying, oh, he's going to be irrelevant. Nobody cares about Francis Ngannou anymore. And one of the ones I kept hearing over and over and over again, well, he may have gotten paid, but he didn't get that massive boxing match he wanted against Tyson Fury. What a mistake this was, to go fight bums in PFL, and all because he wanted that boxing match that he's never going to get. And I said, we don't know that yet. We don't know. I posted a clip of that on my Instagram today. You can go check it out at MMA Joey C. I posted it. I said, look, we don't know yet. He may get a big boxing match. We do not know yet. But people continue to move the goalposts and say, oh, he's going to be irrelevant in PFL and he's going to be fighting bums and they're not going to sell any pay-per-views and PFL is going to go out of business and PFL made a massive mistake. But really people kept harping on, well, he's not going to get that big boxing match he wanted. He's not going to get paid from the boxing match he wanted. And now we have the news. I mean, this is massive news for Francis Ngannou. We have the news that we are getting Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou in a boxing match. Now, I don't claim to understand the whole title system with boxing. I don't claim to understand it all. All I know is they will be trying to knock each other out. This is not going to be one of those fights where there's no knockdowns or they're not really trying. It's being reported that this is going to be a legit boxing match. Now, I don't understand how that works with the title situation. We do not know yet. This is basically new fight news that just came out. But what a win for Francis Ngannou. And my perception has changed a little bit because I do believe he will lose to Tyson Fury. I do believe these are two different sports. And I do believe it will devalue Francis a little bit. But I don't think it's enough to actually matter, which I said before, I do think he'll get devalued. I don't want him to have a boxing match. I don't want him to fight Tyson Fury. I'm not interested in it at all. And we're going to talk about that more in a second. But people are already coming out. I even seen Dana White's lapdog, Kevin Iole, saying, what a joke this is, the boxing, and who could possibly do this, and who wants to see this. Kevin Iole is Dana White's lapdog. He will do anything for Dana White, including going to a public restroom with him. That's what Kevin Iole is. So if you're reading any of his stories from Yahoo, just know he's Dana White's lapdog. And people are already coming out and saying, well, Francis is going to get destroyed and then nobody's ever going to care about it. The goalpost will continue to move over and over and over again. It will never end no matter what. These people are actively rooting against Francis Ngannou. It doesn't matter what he does. He could go out there and brutally KO Tyson Fury and win whatever boxing titles Tyson Fury has. Every title could be on the line ever. And they would say, you know what? It would have been better if he did it in the UFC. There wasn't enough pay-per-view buys. Nobody cared. Nobody watched it. It was just, no matter what will happen, the goalpost will continue to move. It does not matter to these people. I've never seen a community like the MMA community be in another man's pockets as much as the MMA community has been in Francis Ngannou's pockets. And they will continue to move the goalposts. I guarantee it. They're going to say Francis Ngannou is going to get destroyed. Francis Ngannou is going to get devalued. Francis Ngannou may have gotten this payday, but it would have meant so much more if he beat John Jones, who's the greatest of all time. He may box Tyson Fury, but he'll never be considered the GOAT because he didn't take on John Jones. And they'll start saying he ducked John Jones or he was scared of John Jones. Or, well, good riddance to him. This is one we heard a lot. Good riddance to him because he was inactive in the UFC, which was an absolute joke because he wasn't actually inactive in the UFC. I know technically he was. If you want to get technical, UFC was icing him. He wanted to fight. The UFC was unwilling to offer him those fights. So now you're going to see a shift in the narrative. I guarantee I've called this over the last 6, 7, 8 months. You will see a shift in the narrative. You will see that Francis Ngannou is going to get destroyed. After he gets destroyed, he's not going to matter. Oh, is there a belt on the line? Is there not a belt on the line? Does it actually matter? Nobody's going to care about this. Oh, it's ruining boxing. Boxing is an absolute joke. This is a gimmick fight. You're going to see all these just common, things said over and over and over again by the Francis Ngannou detractors. It is absolutely embarrassing. I don't know Francis Ngannou personally. I'm not friends with Francis Ngannou. He's not cutting me a paycheck. I can't believe how many people are just actively rooting against another human being who, for all we know, is a relatively good person. We don't know him personally. We don't know every facet of his life, but it's not like he has a checkered past where we can say, yeah, this guy's a scumbag. Let's root against him, all because he just wanted to fight out his UFC contract and get terms that he liked. And he has literally now, with this Tyson Fury announcement, he has literally gotten everything he could have ever asked for in the combat sports world. He got a contract that he's happy with. He's now getting the big boxing match against Tyson Fury. He's getting his opponent paid a minimum of $2 million when he does fight MMA in PFL. And he's also not locked down to a 6-7 fight deal. He's locked down to a 2 or 3 fight deal with PFL. So he's literally, in every possible way, Francis Ngannou has won. He has taken on the UFC and he has won. And he has set a precedent. And this is why the UFC is so angry about this. This is why Dana White is so angry about this. Because Francis Ngannou has set a precedent. I compared this a while ago to a bug's life. When one ant stands up, they might all stand up. And then there goes our way of life. That's a famous quote from Bug's Life. And essentially what Francis Ngannou did, he was that first ant to stand up to the UFC. He stood up to the UFC. He fought out his contract. Everyone just tried to shame him and say what a mistake it was. And then he goes on to prove, well, maybe it wasn't a mistake. He's going to make more outside the UFC. He's going to get a bigger boxing match outside the UFC. And maybe it wasn't a mistake. So then that's going to inspire other fighters, potentially other big name fighters, to attempt to fight out their contracts as well, because the UFC has these incredibly restrictive contracts and people are kind of scared to stand up to the UFC. People are kind of scared to attempt to fight out their deals because the UFC is vindictive when you attempt to fight out your deal. Look at Nate Diaz. He tried to fight out his deal, and what did they do? They gave him Khamzat Chimaev on the last fight of his deal. They iced him for a while and then finally caved, and they said, okay, we'll give you one more fight. We'll give you Khamzat Chimaev. Now, ultimately, that fight didn't come to fruition, but what happened here was Francis Ngannou stood up to Dana White, stood up to the UFC, got everything he wanted, and just won every possible, any inconceivable way you look at this situation, Francis Ngannou is a massive winner here. It does not matter what happens from here. Now, in terms of the actual boxing match, Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury, I don't care about it at all. I'm not into these gimmicky fights. I think this is a gimmick fight. I know Dana White says it's a gimmick, and then he says, oh, I don't do gimmicks, and then he's trying to make Fury versus John Jones. The whole Fury versus John Jones talk was only to detract from Francis Ngannou. That's the only reason Dana White did that. Now, I have never been a fan of any MMA boxing co-promotion. I wasn't a fan. I didn't even watch Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather. That's how little I care about these crossover boxing matchups. And I do believe my early prediction, I already told you early in the video, my early prediction is that Francis Ngannou loses this boxing match because MMA and boxing are two totally different sports. And Tyson Fury is one of the best boxers in the sport. Francis Ngannou, he has crazy power punching, but he's not known for being a super technical boxer. He was getting outstruck by Cyril Gane, and then he mixed in the grappling to win that fight with a blown out knee, which was just incredible. But nonetheless, an early prediction is I think Francis Ngannou loses this fight. Now, does this devalue him? I think it will devalue a little bit, but the more I think about it, this boxing match is going to be so big, okay? People are going to care about this boxing match. A lot of the MMA community, even though they say Francis Ngannou is irrelevant, they're going to watch this boxing match. And for me, Francis Ngannou's popularity is going to go up, win or lose. And then imagine in the unlikely world that Francis Ngannou somehow pulls it off. It would be insanity. Imagine, he has crazy KO power, unbelievable KO power. If there's anyone that could pull it off in any weight class, it would be at heavyweight, in my opinion. And again, I don't think he's going to win, but imagine if he does win. People will still find a way to move the goalpost. They'll say, oh, well, he beat a washed-up Tyson Fury. That'll be the new line. He beat a washed-up Tyson Fury. Now, again, I'm not a big fan of these types of fights because they're not compelling to me. I've never watched any of them. I don't care for any of them. But the reason my perception has changed is I have to order this fight. I will be ordering Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou. This is probably the most shocking thing I've even said on my channel. If you've been watching my channel for the last 2 years since I started it, probably the most shocking thing I've said. because I have to support Francis Ngannou. At this point, the way the MMA community has rallied against him, I have to support him. I may even buy one and give it away to somebody who watches the channel. That's how happy I am for Francis Ngannou. What an unbelievable life story. And to stand up to the UFC and win in this capacity is unheard of. He will go down in history to set a precedent that will have ripple effects on UFC contracts for years to come. That's how big this news is. To get a mega deal from PFL, and then on top of that, have the freedom to go box and get a boxing match against a big name like Tyson Fury. This will have ripple effects. I will repeat this. This will have ripple effects on UFC contracts for the rest of eternity, essentially. Francis Ngannou should have a 30 for 30 by ESPN on his life in the next 30 to 40 years. That's how big of a deal this is for Francis Ngannou. And what an unbelievable life story. I can't believe people were rooting against this guy for no reason. It's not like he's John Jones and has this checkered past and you just want to root against him because he's a scumbag. They solely rooted against him because they were mad we were not getting Francis Ngannou versus John Jones. That is it. And I'm as disgusted as anyone that we're not getting Francis Ngannou versus John Jones. That was my number one fight I wanted over the last couple years. That's not on Francis Ngannou. That is on the UFC. Because I believe, and again, this is kind of where my perception has changed, when Francis Ngannou goes and boxes Tyson Fury, even if he loses, his popularity will elevate. And it's a different sport. The UFC is the best promotion in MMA. They could easily say he went on and took on the best boxer in another sport and he had a competitive fight. Look what they did. Look how they warped Conor McGregor. Floyd Mayweather essentially carried Conor McGregor in a boxing match and they acted like Conor McGregor damn near knocked him out. That's the way they acted. So they could have repackaged it and resold it, and I think PFL will repackage it and resell it like, look, he went on and take on Tyson Fury, one of the most elite boxers of all time, and he tried his best and he took chances and he ultimately lost, but that's not his sport. He's coming back to his sport where he knocks everyone dead. The UFC could have done that. The UFC could have gave him that ability to go box Tyson Fury and then come back and fight in MMA. Or he could have fought John Jones and then give him that opportunity to go fight Tyson Fury. And you can't tell me, oh, well, the UFC doesn't want their champions devalued by losing to boxers. It happened with Conor McGregor. It happened when Conor McGregor was the lightweight champ and the featherweight champ, I think, still at that point. They let him go box Floyd Mayweather and finally stripped him of the belts. And Conor McGregor got destroyed in that fight, got finished in that fight. It worked perfectly fine. They're still selling Conor McGregor to this day. Hasn't won a lightweight fight since 2016, 7 years ago. There's people watching the sport for years now who've never even seen Conor McGregor to win a fight. That's how crazy it is. So I just don't buy it that the UFC couldn't have found a way to do this and make it work out for all parties. They just didn't want to give a fighter like Francis Ngannou the ability to negotiate that in his contract because they did not want to set a precedent. And I don't hate the UFC for it. I understand it's their business. They want to try to mold their business and keep their business and run a certain way. And when they start to do this, I honestly think it becomes less appetizing for the consumer and for the average MMA fan. I'd be disgusted if every other week we were getting an MMA fighter crossing over to boxing for a big boxing match. I don't want to see it. I don't care about it at all. But I feel like with this fighter, Francis Ngannou, who's gone out there and just killed everyone, knocked out everyone outside of Cyril Gane, and the fact that he wanted to do this, they could have found a way. They could have found a way to make a one-fight deal and make the John Jones fight, but they didn't want to risk Francis Ngannou leaving afterwards to go box and then losing. And they just don't like being stood up to. Dana White and the UFC's ultimately, they're a bully. They're a bully. They don't like anyone attempting to stand up to them, and they are vindictive because of it. And this situation is just a big slap in the face to Dana White and the UFC. And, I guarantee you right now, Dana White is scrambling right now. And I believe that Dana White will announce massive UFC news. If not today, I think it will be today. It will be tomorrow because Dana White, he is very, very petty. And the fact that this news of Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury is rippling through the MMA community, he's like, no, we got to one-up it. We got to one-up it. So what could possibly Dana White and the UFC announce today? I think there's a couple possible options. I think one possible option is UFC 293, which I believe will be Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. Co-main event potentially, Jamal Hill versus Yuri Prochazka. Then you have UFC 294, which I believe will be either Islam versus Volk or Islam versus Charles Oliveira. And then maybe a co-main event of Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. And then you have UFC 296, which this may be the announcement. Which maybe somehow this Francis Ngannou news has been a kick in the butt to everyone in the UFC, and they finally booked Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. If I had to guess, I don't believe, all year I've been saying I don't think McGregor Chandler happens. This Francis Ngannou news may be the kick in the butt the UFC needed to be like, you know what? We'll issue Conor an exemption for USADA. Well, it doesn't matter if he's using PEDs. We'll book the fight. We'll announce it for UFC 296. We'll figure out the logistics later. But do not be surprised if we get some massive fight announcements later today. Special announcement from UFC President Dana White. It'll be live streamed on YouTube or Instagram. He will announce some mega fight news later today in an attempt to overshadow Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou, because right now he is disgusted. But ultimately, I'm not a big fan of this boxing match. I'm going to watch it just to show my support for another grown man. This will be one grown man giving his money to another grown man who happens to be a multimillionaire at this point. But I have to, because the way the MMA community has reacted to Francis Ngannou has been disgusting and appalling. To root against another human being simply because you are a Dana White sycophant and a UFC sycophant and a UFC shill. And you're going to see a lot of the MMA media who shills for Dana White kind of crapping on this as well, because they're so scared of Dana White. They'd rather go cover Power Slap than be positive about a Francis Ngannou Tyson Fury fight. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. Let me know what you guys think about this fight announcement. Are you going to be watching? What do you think? What news do you think Dana White is going to announce later today? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.